Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar. This is Beth Schachter, and I'm Executive Director here at the FP2020 Secretariat. Thank you for taking time to join us here today, wherever you are, if it's morning, afternoon, or evening. We're very pleased to be presenting the outcome of our 4th annual progress report, Momentum at the Midpoint, which looks at July 2015 to July 2016 data, and to be sharing with you the stories within that and the story of all of your work together through this collaboration and this partnership of ours. Before I go into the report itself, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that this has been a unique week for many of us here in the family planning community in the aftermath of the U.S. presidential elections, and recognizing that historically this has meant a shift in U.S. political support for sexual and reproductive health issues and family planning in particular. At this point, none of us are quite sure what that means. A lot of colleagues have been working this week with representatives in Congress and with contacts to the incoming Trump administration to try and determine their positions and their support for family planning. We know that there's been a strengthened support within some of the caucuses on the Hill for family planning, but that there is not currently a majority there. So just want to take this moment to say that we are all here in a moment of transition and of uncertainty, and that we are committed to working with colleagues to advocate for and promote ongoing strong support for both family planning and for UNFPA from the U.S. government. At FP2020, we'll be continuing that work, and we'll be trying to share what we learn with you and with all of our networks as well as soon as we learn things or as things transition, to work with you to adjust to whatever transition is ahead of us. We've been also speaking this week with all of our focal points, giving a similar briefing both in English and in French in recent days, and sharing similar messages so that, again, as we make this transition, whatever the transition is going to be together, that we optimize how we use the FP2020 platform. And for those who are unaware, FP2020 as a process in the Secretariat is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and by the UK Department for International Development, so our funding is untouched by this. It's the breadth of the partnership and the funding of much of the work that you all are doing that, of course, is in this area of uncertainty. But I mention this only because I want you to know that we have this platform now in a way that we didn't under previous such transitions, and that we can use this together to best support our community to go through this transition. So I invite your partnership in that. Obviously, again, we don't know what that means yet, but you have our commitment here at the Secretariat to work with you to use this platform to be as effective as possible to sustain and bolster both this transition and our goal of acceleration for family planning in partnership with the U.S., but also more broadly than that. So I'll leave it at that for now, but do think of that as we're going through this, this report this morning, so that when we get to the Q&A, and we have, I think, a substantial amount of time this morning to talk together about both the information that we'll be sharing from the report, but also how we use this EAC in our broader partnership with all of you to move things forward. We want to hear from you and really start that conversation now. So I wanted to set that out from the outset. So with that, I'm going to turn it over, or before I turn to Rati, let me go through the agenda that we'll be going through today. I'll be doing some top-line findings of the report itself, and then my colleague Jason Brenner, who many of you know well, will provide a deeper dive into the data presented in this report, as well as an overview of the financing, the FP financing analysis conducted by our partner, Kaiser Family Foundation. And then we're going to provide you with portfolio updates on country support, global rights and advocacy, and the knowledge and evidence portfolios, and that'll be done by colleagues here in the room that you know well as well, Eva Ross and Sandra Jordan. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Rati to explain a few housekeeping notes, and then we'll get into the agenda.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in the webinar room. Before we get started with the program, I'd like to take several minutes to just walk you through some logistical notes. On your screen, you should be seeing the slides, as well as 3 pods, one which shows you attendees, one where you can submit questions, and a chat view. We encourage you to submit questions at any point during the webinar through the Q&A pod. You can also submit those questions through the chat feature. During the Q&A, you will also be able to unmute yourself to ask a question by pressing *6. We'll repeat that at a later point as well. In the event you're unable to reach us through the webinar room itself, please email Sarah Meyerhoff at SMEYERHOFF@familyplanning2020.org. We'll be adding that email into the chat box shortly. Also, this webinar is being recorded. Again, thank you for your participation.
Thank you, Rati. So with that, we'll start with our top-level infographic that we update every year to show impact of the family planning effort in the 69 focus countries. And this year, it's a privilege to announce that for the first time ever, there are 300 million women and girls using modern forms of contraception in the 69 FP2020 focus countries. And of course, this is an incredible effort of progress that builds on all of the work that all of you have been doing over decades to bring the FP community to this incredible point. We have a little over 30.2 million additional users from our measurement starting point of 2012, bringing us about 25% above what the traditional progress projection had been. We're still falling significantly short of our goal, but we've learned a lot in the last 4 years, and the data has improved considerably so that we're able to see what has improved and what the changes have been in the sector through these 4 years. So we'll be going through some of that in greater detail, but I'll just give you a couple of the highlights of progress so that you can feel some of the incredible change that's taken place within all of this. One important point is that for the first time ever in Eastern and Southern Africa, 30% of women and girls are using modern contraception, so that MCPR rate is a new milestone for that region. And many of you may also know as well that the Ouagadougou Partnership exceeded their goal that they set in 2011 when the partnership was started of reaching an additional million women and girls by 2015. Because they've exceeded that goal, they've now more than doubled it to 2.2 between 2016 and 2020. So we're seeing progress in some of the areas that have been much farther behind. And again, that means progress along the range of activities, not only providing contraception, but widening the method mix, improving supply chain work, and critically also learning from what it means to have rights-based programs that are created with rights in mind. And you'll be hearing more from Sandra Jordan about that later on this morning. So with that, I'm going to take you to our traditional measurement progress, which is a graph I think you're all familiar with. Again, the top line is the sort of milestones on the path to 2020 and reaching 120 million women and girls. The bottom line that you see measuring out to 2020 is the projection of what we think would have happened had FP 2020 and this partnership not push for that acceleration, and then the line 25% above that, that orange line, is where we are now. So again, noting that we are off track, but have learned a lot along the way, and we continue to build this on the base of work that led to 2020, acknowledging again, all the incredible efforts that have taken place up to that point. Next slide. So challenges and opportunities. Again, recognizing that we've learned a lot along the way. We also have learned a lot about how family planning services are reaching or are failing to reach specific subpopulations of women and girls. The evidence base continues to grow a wide range of issues and interventions, including youth-oriented approaches, again, method mix diversity, how to address stockouts, what we know about contraceptive discontinuation, and again, the impact of rights-based programming. Significantly, we're also learning a lot more about LARCs and how to effectively program to include those, including for young people. And there is an ongoing discussion as well about how to expand LARC access in humanitarian situations and working with those partnerships as well. And postpartum family planning remains a critical point or critical opportunity in terms of building bridges with the maternal health sector and reaching women both postpartum and post-abortion so that we can ensure that as they seek to delay or to stop having additional children, that they have the services that they want and need. One point that came up during our reference group meeting, which took place about 2 weeks ago, and I'll talk about that in greater depth in a minute, but both Dr. Babatunde Oshotumen and Dr. Chris Elias noted in looking at the breadth of the data that we now have available, that had we had this information available in 2012 in a way that allows us to interrogate programs and investments with more specificity, that we would be farther along in our progress. But I think that it's really encouraging to see the ways in which countries are now using that evidence, again, to monitor their performance against their own specific goals and to try and align the country family planning programs, including with donors and other partners, toward greater impact and higher impact services. So we'll be talking about that more throughout this morning. So one of the issues that continually comes up is what we can do better. There's a few areas that continue to rise to the top in terms of being critical opportunities and really being the foundation of both a partnership and to sustainable programs, both for family planning and then how they link up with the broader development agenda. And one critically is the concept of accountability. This is something that I think it threads through the SDGs. It's the basis of the Every Woman, Every Child initiative, the IERG report, and those efforts continue to push around the concept of you're going to have what are really soft commitments and goals, then this concept of accountability needs to evolve as well, so that we're empowering our commitments and our relationships with one another to hold each other accountable. And we have treaty obligations, we have UN processes that have a legal framework around them, but these commitments to each other through programs and goals around development are really up to us to make sure that we're holding one another's feet to the fire. But I don't want that to just sound negative, because I think that people make commitments with the best of intent toward progress and goals, and that the attitude of supporting one another to meet our goals and to address the challenges that come up as we set goals are really critical to an effective partnership. So this continues to be a topic of conversation with the reference group. It continues to be a topic of conversation for those of us who are participating in the broader processes through the UN as well, both Sustainable Development Goals and Every Woman, Every Child. So we continue to bring those learnings and those conversations across the layers of the FP 2020 partnership, including down to the country-level conversations, because I think that it's that personal and institutional accountability that's going to move us forward, and particularly in this moment of uncertainty, where our commitments to each other, I think, are going to be the thing that are going to get us through this time. This concept has new meaning and new resonance. So I think I covered partnerships and talking about that as well. And I'll talk more about how the FP 2020 partnership continues to grow. But again, we are in a different place as a sector than we were 16 years ago when we faced another critical transition as well. And so I think these partnerships and these commitments and relationships that we have are going to be the foundation that will pull us through this. Another critical area that rises to the top in pretty much every conversation we have is around young people. And all of you know the numbers and statistics in terms of the populations that we seek to serve. But I think we're learning a lot and getting a lot smarter about how we work with young people and include them in the processes of creating programs and policies, not just pulling them in to talk with them about it, but to build with them. And we are committed to making those adjustments as well. We're not fully there, but we're learning as we go, and we'll hear more about that later this morning as well. So next we'll talk about mobilizing resources. And before we get into this, I'll just point out as well that what we're going to be looking at is 2015 data. So already that has a certain sort of bittersweet quality to it, looking a little bit to the future, but we do want to recognize that there are important trends within that and opportunities that we can really coalesce around with regard to the partnership. And we're also looking now at what we know and what we have for financing for the 300 million girls that we're currently serving. If we're going to reach the FP 2020 goal, or when we reach the FP 2020 goal, that'll be 390 million women and girls. So we're going to have to grow our financing by at least a quarter, because we're short as well in terms of financing the full package for the current 300 million. So we're going to have to be really strategic and creative in terms of how we grow this financing portfolio going forward. But we're pleased to share with you what we do know now in terms of tracking from up to 2015. And Jason will be sharing more about the process or what it is that we know about tracking financing expenditures so that we can get smarter about what the actual costs are so that we can advocate to meet those costs. So again, looking at 2015, we see the first year since 2012 that financing has taken a dip. Donor government disbursements for bilateral programs were $1.3 billion for family planning activity, which is about 6% below 2014. The decline is largely due to the appreciation of the U.S. dollar, and after exchange rate fluctuations are taken into account, 2015 funding actually remains about the same as 2014. And that's because in currency of origin, 5 donors, including Denmark, France, Germany, the Netherlands, and Sweden, all increased their funding. 2 donors, Canada and the United States, remained flat, and 3 donors, Australia, Norway, and UK, declined. You can see that a little more clearly in this next slide, which is our pie chart that shows what the percentages are for bilateral assistance. And the U.S. remained the largest bilateral donor, accounting for almost half, or around 47% of the total bilateral funding in 2015, followed by the UK at about 20%, and then the Netherlands, France, and Sweden. The U.S. and UK have accounted for approximately 2/3 of funding over the entire period, so recent trends have largely been driven by these 2 donors. What's interesting as well is that if you add in the foundations as a group, they actually would come in 4th. And if you were to add the U.S., the UK, the Netherlands, and the donor foundations together, that accounts for about 90% of the bilateral funding for family planning. So I think we can look at that as an opportunity, both in terms of those other donors who are currently on this chart, but thinking about who else we might be wanting to reach out to in future years as well to try and grow this and reach maybe a more balanced pie chart across the spectrum of donors. Also not here, shown here is UNFPA, who spent around $341 million on family planning out of their resources. That's about 42% of their resources. That's for family planning. So that's up slightly, about 2% over 2014. And the foundation investment is about $190 million total. Okay, so that brings us to mobilizing domestic resources, which has to be an important part of this conversation. Many governments have made commitments to increase domestic funding or domestic spending on family planning, and several efforts are underway to track these expenditures. So the task is complicated by the nature of government spending and the fact that it can be difficult to isolate family planning costs from the larger health budget. The WHO collects data on health expenditures reported by national governments, and we hope that eventually that database will provide annual tracking of health expenditures with family planning specific reports. To date, however, reports on family planning expenditures are available only for a small number of countries. In the interim, a collective effort is underway to fill the gap by using data from the FPA and the Netherlands Interdisciplinary Demographic Institute, or NEDI. In most FP2020 countries, however, the estimates have not yet been validated by the governments, and large variations exist in what's being reported. So next year, we hope to take advantage of country consensus meetings around the data efforts to have countries review and validate their expenditure estimates with the aim of reporting country data next year. And this was also a topic of conversation among the countries who participated in the reference group meeting as well. And I think these moments of recognizing together realistically what the landscape is for financing with regard to donors. And if governments have the goal of growing their programs, they're also going to have the goal of paying for what they can in an incremental way in order for those programs to be sustainable. So I think that there's a growing recognition of what that means, and again, an international alignment to try and support countries to making that shift as and where they can. So with that, I'll shift to giving you an update on the FP2020 partnership overall. The progress report outlines how the partnership has grown over the recent years, and this is a place where I'd like to pause as well to make sure that we're talking together about how we use our partnership through this expert advisory community to greatest effect. I'll just be honest in saying that I don't think that we're there yet. We, I think, have controlled the conversation with you by creating these moments. It hasn't been fluid. I think we need to open that up, and we need your suggestions about what's going to work better for you so that this partnership becomes something that's flourishing and much more fluid. I had the privilege of being at both the RHSC Partners meeting and the PMNCH Executive Board meeting in Maputo the week before the FP2020 Reference Group meeting, and those processes, for those of you who participate in one or both, are member-driven, and that partnership is really, clearly there are challenges within that model, but it's really flourishing because of the incredible energy behind that. I'm not necessarily suggesting that we shift to that, but clearly we haven't tapped into the enormous energy that this community can bring to this effort in a way that can really help move us forward, both through this global partnership and at the country level. So I hope that in 2017 we will open things up to have those conversations with you and to making those shifts that are going to make us a much stronger partner in that way and much more open to all that you all have to contribute to the process as well. So with regard to overall FP 2020 commitments, there's been a steady increase over time. There are 3 countries that joined last year, and I think part of this was that opportunity, ICPD being in Bali, presented to all of us to really develop relationships with additional partners in Asia, so that Afghanistan, Laos, PDR, and Vietnam were all able to join. We also had 3 new organizations that made FP 2020 commitments, and there are, I think, people on the line today that are responsible for all 3 of those, and so thank you for that. We now have the Margaret Pike Trust with the Population and Sustainability Network who've joined, PSI joined, which is an exciting opportunity, and Chase Africa. And then as well, 4 countries, or excuse me, 4 other partners recommitted or renewed their commitment and expanded those. And details of all these commitments are available on our website if you'd like to learn more about what's within them. But the Government of Germany, IPPF, IntraHealth, and FHI 360 all renewed their FP 2020 commitments. So we continue to look at those partnerships as the core of the FP 2020 effort, and again, look to you for how we can strengthen those going forward. So in looking at how we've been working with countries, I think that's the biggest story of change from the FP 2020 partnership in the last year. And I know we've shared some of that with all of you in the wake of the focal point workshop. But now that we've had a chance to have all 3 of those this year, we wanted to share with you some of the highlights in terms of the commonality of areas that countries are indicating that they see as the points where we need to do stronger work or better investment in order to make progress. I'll also say, and Eva will be sharing this with you as well, that we are committed to continuing the focal point workshops in 2017, and we'll be doing those in the latter half of the year. But just to say that I don't think you'll see any surprises in terms of this list, but that we continue to need to be able to mobilize technical resources against the need to shift programs and policies to address these issues across the board. So with that, I'll bring you to the reference group meeting, and I wanted to share as well that the agenda for the reference group meeting is online. If you are interested, you can take a look at that, but this was the second time that the FP 2020 reference group has met in a partner country, and we're committed to doing that on an annual basis going forward. So we had really quite an exciting lineup that really started with our alignment with the PMNCH Executive Board meeting, which again took place the week before in Maputo, which we deliberately scheduled sort of back-to-back so that PMNCH would go first and FP 2020, and then we had a bridge day, and then the investors group from GFF had their meeting as well. We were asked by the Secretary General and by our co-chairs as well to not only align the scheduling of these meetings as and where possible to make for greater coherence, but also so there could be thematic discussions that thread through all of these. And I think that we saw both the benefit of that and the impact of it in that it's rather exhausting to have 2 weeks of meetings back to back. And I think that there's some learnings about what the takeaway is if people are in that many meetings over time. But it really was a great opportunity, particularly for FP 2020 and the investors group, to really drive home this message of the critical opportunity that the GFF provides for family planning. So I'll walk you through what that week looked like, starting with the Sunday before the reference group meeting, where there was a youth convening in Tanzania to train young people as advocates so that they could participate in a range of events and meetings that took place across the week. That meeting was funded and co-organized by the Torchlight Foundation with funding from SIF and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But it proved to be a great opportunity to identify young people and, again, to give them a seat in a lot of these discussions. Monday and Tuesday of that week was the reference group meeting. On Tuesday, the GFF CSO community also held their own convening. And Tuesday evening, we launched the FP2020 annual report. On Wednesday, again, we had our Bridge Day, which was an opportunity for the reference group members and GFF investors group members to meet together to look at the impact and the opportunity of the GFF to date for family planning. And then that Thursday and Friday, the GFF had their investors group meeting. So in looking at the reference group agenda, we had we took advantage of this opportunity of linking with the GFF to focus on financing specifically. And so the first day of our meeting in particular tried to peel back some of the layers there of what we know and what we don't know. And Jason led a session on mobilizing resources, again, of what it is that we know of actual costs for programs and financial allocation, both from donors and countries. John Skibiak from RHSC then presented the commodity gap analysis that many of you heard at the RHSC meeting, again, looking at forecasting out both what we need currently to pay for current use for family planning and then what the expense would be going out to 2020 if we were to meet the FP 2020 goal, so we can look at what that gap is and have sort of more realistic planning against that gap. We then asked the 6 countries who are on the FP 2020 reference present their financial landscape. They have a goal. What does it cost to meet that goal? What are the currently available resources in country, and what are the gaps? And then we had the opportunity to talk about ways that those gaps might be filled. Again, either through domestic resources, looking at the GFF as one area of potential. For West African countries, there's the SWED. For other countries, there are other specific investments as well. But it was a really honest discussion where countries really exposed and shared their data and their information in a I think, a refreshing way that really set the tone for having in-depth conversations realistically around the challenges that we have here with regard to financing. We also had an important technical session on youth that was organized by Chandramuli, who many of you know from WHO, in partnership with the Secretariat and with Margaret Balaji, who's the youth representative on the reference group, again, to look at the high-impact practices that we know are the most promising and to talk about ways that needs to shift, looking at country-specific programs. And so a lot of analysis was done by WHO and by PRB and some other partners to help make sure that people in the room had the latest data and evidence around where programs are currently focusing and what those opportunities are for shifting. And so 2017, in addition to being a critical focus on financing and on CSO engagement overall, will also be, I think, for us a year of really getting smarter on youth and trying to make those transitions to higher impact programs. And then quickly on the Bridge Day, we did something similar in that we looked at the landscape overall for financing, but then the reference group and investors group members, represented by many ministers of health, had a session chaired by Moriam Clayson, who's now joined the GFF to lead their efforts, to talk specifically about their financing, their GFF investment packages and how they see family planning fitting into there. There was, acknowledged that this has not been consistent across, and I think the impact of this Bridge Day was this high-level advocacy moment of everybody hearing the country say that for them, family planning is critical to their RMN-CAH package of care. And we're hoping that this sort of moment of group recognition of the criticality will lead to stronger processes and a more openness to family planning as a potential for GFF investments. So there wasn't time to go into the nitty-gritty or the details of any of the investment cases or the PADs. Rather, we thought it was a critical political moment to have countries themselves talking about that importance both to the investors group, to the GFF Secretariat, and then bolstered by the discussions that led into that over the first 2 days of the FP 2020 reference group. So we'll look to support countries as they work to push harder for family planning as an investment in the GFF, and again, look for your partnership going forward in that. And then we'll just end on what I think is a positive note of how the SDGs provide us a unique opportunity to build bridges to other sectors. And Julia Bunting participated in the reference group as a discussant, and she challenged the group to not think about how we need to really sell FP as a critical investment to other sectors, but rather to present to them how family planning can really advance their work and ask for their partnership in advancing their goals through family planning. And I think that that's a really healthy way of looking at the potential that the SDGs provide to all of us in terms of how we can move family planning going forward. Recognizing the potential limitations of financing within our own sector, building those bridges is more critical now than ever before. So with that, I will turn it over to Jason Brenner to look at the measurement agenda and the core indicators at the midpoint.
Thanks, Beth. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to join you in the webinar this morning and present the data from the 2016 Progress Report. I hope by now all of you have had the opportunity to explore the digital site. And of course, we have the print reports here and are sending them out to many of you, and hope to get you print reports over time. Before I get to the data, I would like to cover a few methodological issues first. First, just to familiarize all of you to how the data are collected for the progress report. This graphic shows the process each year for developing annual estimates for the FP2020 progress report. And I hope that by now all of you are aware that FP2020 uses a suite of quantitative metrics, or what we call our 17 core indicators, to monitor progress annually across the 69 focus countries. Traditionally, countries have relied on population-based surveys, and I know that we all know them well, the Demographic Health Survey, the Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey, or MIX, and we've had to wait several years between surveys to then assess the impact of all of our efforts. So FP 2020 has aimed to produce annual estimates of progress, and to do so, we have, of course, the hard efforts of Track 20, project based at Avenir Health, that has developed methods to take advantage of not just the most recent survey, but all available nationally representative surveys to develop these annual estimates of many, but not all of our core indicators. Happy to clarify some of that more as we move forward. In several countries as well, more rapid surveys, as well as regularly collected service statistics from the health sector are providing new data on which to base these estimates. So you'll see that at the beginning of the year, from approximately now through actually, because we're already looking to next year's progress report, now through till next July, we are working with Track 20 and with M&E officers that they train in commitment-making countries to collect all the available data, to then make estimates, which we do during May, June, and July, and to hold country consensus workshops so that countries come together, and that's focal points as well as civil society organizations, that they come together and validate those estimates. At some point, we have to close our window of data collection, and so if surveys enter in or come in after July, as the Myanmar DHS has just come out, for example, that's not going to make it into this year's progress report, but we do pick it up and collect it next year. So a huge thanks goes out to the Track 20 team, as well as PMA 2020, who are one of the ones who are collecting new survey data, and of course the PME working group, which provides feedback and input on our analysis and our drafts of the progress report as we move forward each year. So another couple notes on methodology, and hopefully next year I won't have to cover these because we'll all be familiar with them, but I just want to make sure that we understand how the estimation is working. We are using something called the Family Planning Estimation Tool, or FPET, as a statistical model that produces these annual estimates of MCPR, and we are doing that for all women. and not just married women. And so if you see in the progress report data that look unfamiliar at a country level, just check, because it's likely you're looking at an all-women estimate for a given country. We use it to estimate unmet need and demand satisfied. And we incorporate all that survey data as shown here in this graphic. And we have an output then that is an annual estimate. This is done at a country level, but to get to the full number of users and the additional users that Beth shared earlier, we essentially have to base that off of a baseline. And so the important methodological component is that in 2012, we know the total number of users of family planning, and then in each subsequent year, we compare the total number of users of family planning, and we say that in 2012 there were 0 additional users, and we are able to look at the balance of the current year in comparison to the 2012 to get to our number of additional users. The second important component that I want to make you aware of is that we are doing a rolling baseline, which means that in each year we're actually recalculating the whole period, meaning we're recalculating because of the new data. We may know things about 2012 that we didn't know. And so we urge you to recycle your old progress reports, because for each country, each year has been re-estimated. And so last year's progress report is not really to be compared with this one. Thank you, Beth. Okay, so Beth has already shared this graphic, which shows our progress versus the historic trend and versus the track that we would want to be on to reach the 120 million additional users. And she mentioned that we are at a historic moment of 300 million total users of family planning in the FP 2020 focus countries, and that we are about 19 million behind the benchmark that we would want to be on track towards our goal. I think it's important to note that when you look at this global aggregate, it really hides the diverse progress that we see across the 69 countries. And understanding progress really requires looking at each country's situation and examining each country's data within its own context. And that's really what we are aiming to do with the commitment-making countries, the 38 countries that Beth has mentioned. And so each country has made their own goal in their commitment and is measuring progress towards that goal. And it's important to look at the progress at that level. One of the ways that we do that is to use this graphic, which I hope is becoming familiar to all of you by now. And this is what we're calling sort of an S-curve of MCPR growth. And this curve suggests that there are historical patterns of growth and that countries grow at different rates based on their levels of contraceptive use. So when MCPR is very low, or on the left side of this graphic, countries tend to see slow annual growth in MCPR. And the length of this period can vary by country, but to position themselves to enter a period of rapid growth, countries really have to ensure that there's demand for family planning and that barriers to family planning services are not preventing growth. Countries can then enter into a period of more rapid growth, represented by the boxes that are sort of purplish and blue in the middle there. And this is a period where we expect that countries can really see rapid MCPR growth if they're monitoring progress, investing wisely in high-impact practices and appropriate interventions, and paying attention to demand as well. The pace at which countries grow can vary. And it also is highly related to the demographic dividend. The higher and faster, or the faster that countries grow through this period, the more likely they are to set themselves in a place where they can take advantage of a demographic dividend. And then finally, when contraceptive prevalence reaches higher levels, growth begins to slow down, and it eventually plateaus, and programs at this stage really need to focus on the long-term sustainability of their services, continue to improve service quality, and certainly expand the range of methods that are available, as well as pay attention to equity. It's important to note, and you'll see this in the bottom box there, that 2/3 of women of reproductive age in the FP2020 countries live in countries that are in these latter phases of the S-curve. So we really have to work with countries to understand where they are on this curve, but also to look subnationally, and we have been helping countries to plot their regions on this S-curve and look at where they can expect to see growth and where they have to focus on demand generation and other aspects. So in terms of additional users, let's just look a little bit across the map at where they are, and you can dive deeper into this data in the progress report and look at it by country, but here we're presenting it by region. And first, just to note that there are an estimated 894 million women of reproductive age in the FP2020 countries. That's approximately, we could say approximately 900 million women. They are not distributed evenly across this map. More of them live in Asia, and you will see that Asia is contributing around, South Asia is contributing around 16 million of the additional users. I'm sorry, that's Asia as a whole. That's not surprising, as the most populous FP2020 countries are in that region. Some of that growth is due to population growth. These are large populations that are growing, that are still growing, and some of the growth in additional users is due to an increase in contraceptive prevalence. Other regions have seen more additional users added due to growth in MCPR, and this is particularly the case in focus countries in Africa, where you can see that they've added, in Africa, 13 million additional users, even though they represent only 27% of the total women of reproductive age. So looking forward, Africa is likely to continue to contribute a disproportionate number of the additional users as both the population of women of reproductive age in these areas grows, and as we see them entering into these rapid periods of MCPR increase, as mentioned in the prior S-curve. There's a lot more that I encourage you to explore on MCPR growth, on additional users, and on unmet need, and I certainly don't have time to cover it all today. But one thing that I do want to focus on today is better understanding demand satisfied, and this is something that we, along with Track 20, will aim to do over the coming year, as demand satisfied, as I hope most of you know, is now one of our indicators for the Sustainable Development Goal, Target 3.7, which is by 2030 achieving universal access to reproductive health services, including family planning, information, education, and the integration of reproductive health into national strategies and programs. So this is a key indicator, and I think it's a confusing indicator that we really need to work on better understanding. It's confusing because demand satisfied is affected by both the dynamics of modern contraceptive prevalence rates as well as unmet needs. So you combine those two together to create total demand, and then the demand satisfied is related to that total demand. So it is possible, as shown here in Niger and Djibouti, to have very similar levels of demand satisfied with very different levels of contraceptive use and unmet need. So I think it's important to look at each country, at their demand satisfied, how it's composed of both unmet need and of MCPR, and it's something that we will work with you all as the AC to better understand how to monitor and to use over time. Looking at demand satisfied by region, you can see some stark differences. They're illustrated together in this figure, and this figure shows, as I mentioned, the MCPR in the bottom bar, the darkest bar for each region, the unmet need, which is the lighter upper part of each bar, and those together make up the total demand for family planning. The actual demand satisfied indicator is shown in the gray bar at the bottom of this graphic. And you can see that essentially the calculation here is done by looking at how much of that dark bar is filling each of that total bar. So it's almost sort of like filling up the water in a cup. The size of the cup is about the total demand, and how far you have filled it is about the demand that is satisfied. We see very large differences, and you can see that much of Asia is close to the suggested 75% demand satisfied benchmark that colleagues have suggested as a goal that we should all be striving for. I will note that that 75% is not officially in the SDG language, and so careful when you're talking about the SDGs and that indicator in terms of whether or not that is a benchmark. But that's something as a community I think we need to come to consensus on. Other countries, you can see, or other regions, I'm sorry, West Africa, Central Africa have a long way to go, and as do Eastern and Southern Africa in terms of achieving that 75% benchmark. Colleagues at Track 20 are doing analysis to look at the path to achieving at 75% demand satisfied in 2030, and I will let you know that in almost all of the countries, the path to that demand satisfied indicator or achievement of that SDG goes through the acceleration we need to achieve the FP2020 goal. So it's sort of a stepping stone towards universal access that we really need to accelerate towards, or it becomes very difficult for these countries to achieve their SDG goal. One thing that we've been looking closely at over the last several years is method mix and changes in method mix over time. This map shows the most commonly used modern method in each country, and defined as the single method that makes up the largest proportion of the method mix. And you can see, looking across the focus countries, that modern contraceptive method mix, it varies greatly. It reflects women's preferences, the diverse context in which they live, and the history of programs and when they started. In 27 countries, injectables make up the largest proportion of the method mix. And what we have also done is looked at where there is a method skew, or one method makes up 60% of the modern method use, and these are indicated by a triangle. So we see a dominance of injectables, but we also see method skew, and not always among injectables, but among other methods as well. Method skew is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's important to look at method skew. And what we do know is that from much research, availability of a range of options makes it more likely that women can choose a method that best suits their needs, and in the long term, it increases contraceptive use and satisfaction with the method. I will say that not shown here is a nice graphic that's in the progress report that looks at the growth in injectables and LARCs over time, or changes in method mix. And we have looked across 33 countries with recent trend data that show that what we really are seeing an increase in LARC prevalence as well as in injectables. In some cases, that's to support growth in MCPR use, and in others, it's a substitution, sometimes from pills to injectables, and in some countries, such as Ethiopia, we're seeing injectables to implants. Lots more to cover on the core indicators, but I am going to probably cut short the conversation on the core indicators and then refer to a section of the report that is not one of our core indicators, but it's something that both the PME working group and the reference group felt it was important to highlight in this year's report, and which we hope to continue to highlight, and that is discontinuation. It's important to note that the 300 million users of family planning are not a static group. For various reasons, women and their partners will move in and out of contraceptive use. They may want to have a child, and they may stop using the modern contraceptive method. They may switch to a different method, or they may stop using a method altogether because their not happy with it, can't afford it, don't have access to the method that they would like, or because of side effects. So contraceptive discontinuation, as illustrated in this table, continues to present a challenge to achieving FP 2020 goals. We looked at DHS data since 2012 from 21 countries that showed that discontinuation rates are particularly high for short-term methods. You can see here for pills and injectables that method-related reasons for discontinuation suggest that almost 20% or 1 in 5 users of these methods will stop use within 12 months. So it's critical that we look at discontinuation and understand it better and aim to offer more methods as well as higher quality services and counseling to retain current users of contraceptives. So thanks, and I'll turn it back to Beth at this point.
Thank you, Jason. That was very helpful. So with that, we'll start with our portfolio updates, and I'll turn to Eva Ross, who's Director of our Country Support Efforts. Eva?
Thank you, and good morning and good evening to all of you. I wanted to share with you a little bit of an update from our last webinar, and again, reinforcing that we are very much committed to providing you all, as part of the family planning community, with easy access to the wealth of data. So to that end, as we had mentioned previously, we've updated our website country pages so that they continue to serve as a valuable resource for the community. As you can see here, the newly resigned pages feature key documents, including government strategies and plans, GFF materials, and self-reported commitment updates. You'll also find the updated 2016 core indicator data in both English and French. You'll also find country-specific research and news, as well as enhanced shareability, so that data and information can be shared socially and via email with colleagues and partners within your network. We hope that you'll see these as valuable resources for you and your teams and other stakeholders, and that you'll share them widely. In addition, since they've just been launched, please do let us know how we can work with you to make them better. For example, whether it's alerting us to other materials that we should be posting on specific country pages, and also just providing us with general feedback. Next, I'd like to turn to knowledge and evidence. And we have some exciting updates for all of you. First, I'd like to inform all of you at the EAC that many of you who might be aware of these meetings already, but we, together with the High Impact Practices Collaborate, which includes IPPF, UNFPA, USAID, and the WHO, will be hosting the HIPS Technical Advisory Group and partners meetings in our offices later this month, specifically Monday, November 28th and Tuesday, November 29th. The objectives of these meetings are to provide feedback on 2017 HIP briefs and also identify new priority areas of work, among other important issues. In addition, we're also delighted to announce that in partnership with USAID, we'll soon be adding a family planning HIPS advisor. This advisor will join the FP 2020 Secretariat to provide leadership on the HIPS and create linkages to enhance promotion and dissemination of the HIPS. In particular, this person will be focused on identifying the best way to support country needs, especially as they are identified through the country support team's work with action plans. In addition, this person will also help us continue to enhance how the high impact practices are incorporated in the next round of focal point workshops that, as Beth mentioned earlier, will take place across 2017. Sorry, mic issues. We're very excited to be bringing this person on board soon, and through their leadership, strengthen our work on the HIPS and with WHO, IBP, and the many organizations that contribute to and shape our community's evidence base. I'd next like to turn it over to my colleague, Sandra Jordan.
Sorry, this is Beth. I'm just going to interject real quick. Thanks for that, Eva. I just wanted to say that this position is still open for applications. So, and it was just reissued again today. So if any of you are interested or know somebody who you think would be great for this position, please let us know. We're happy to disseminate the job announcement widely so that we can recruit. So thanks, Eva, for that. So over to you, Sandra.
Thanks very much, and greetings of the day, whichever part of the day you're in. It's Great to be talking to you and updating you on our portfolio in rights, global advocacy, and youth. Human rights remain through the line, throughout everything that we're doing, as you've heard from Jason's comments and how Eva was referring to things and how Beth was pointing things out. FP2020 is working with both country and global partners and even the demographers to define, operationalize, monitor, and measure the impact of rights-based family planning and to work towards ensuring this becomes a best practice in programming and a proven practice in programming. Rights-based family planning, and I know most of you have heard this, but just to underscore, it means ensuring the rights of the client are upheld and that the principles of agency, access, availability of contraceptives, and the quality of care are, and respect and the quality of care are rigorously observed. Increasing numbers of implementers we're finding since a lot of this conversation began in 2012 are folding in rights-based approaches into their new and sometimes they're retrofitting into existing programs, which is adding to our knowledge base on how to do this, if it's a good practice, if it attracts more women, if it serves women better. As a result, and program uptake comes in, we have very strong hopes that the quality of the information will allow for an evidence summit in 2017, excuse me, probably towards the end of that year, so that people can present their findings, we can show how we're better measuring things, and really show that this can be a paradigm shift in how we do programming and family planning. Additionally, and since the last time we talked, we've convened other meetings that have explored the linkages with other sectors, including gender, and talking about how rights-based family planning and gender empowerment come together, and that's a conversation I think needs to be explored much more going forward. And we're also linking with maternal child care and with the HIV community to share learnings and advances in this area. And we're also working closely with WHO in their work with accountability and rights in the continuum of care in the spectrum for women, children, and adolescents. And at this point, the focus on change, it seems to be largely happening in program design. We are looking for ways to make this more of a focus that we can talk about at the country level, that we can help work with Eva and her very excellent team on incorporating it into action plans and CIPs, but we're still looking for that evidence that's going to make a really solid case around this. However, those of you who are advocacy-minded, I would appreciate any ideas and suggestions you have. And to do this, we are going to be launching a very strong community of practice, rolling out a lot of the reports on meetings that we've held this year, various reports and papers that have been written on this topic, and I think will be a very strong resource for rights that we really, and we will have a listserv. So we're really going to be asking provocative questions, figuring out important ways to move forward, areas that you think we're missing. So in January, we will be announcing this, and with Raji's help, we will make this a big announcement and get everybody involved. And we feel like this is a very important focus at all levels, as reproductive rights aren't just limited to the woman in the center, but to everyone who is considering family planning and reproductive health reasons, and for any person who is doing this. And so we feel like sometimes youth are being left out of this conversation. So we're working very hard to absolutely ensure that young people are part of everything that's going on. And so regardless of age, sex, whatever, you're getting the kinds of respectful services that you need and deserve and should have. As a result, I'd like to turn this over to my colleague, Emily Sullivan, who is using her passion and her very aggressive and strategic instincts to move this agenda forward, and let her continue with this. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Sandra. As many of you know, youth is very much on the top of most of our minds. And earlier in this presentation, we highlighted what we can do better. And one of those areas was youth. And as you can tell from the conversation today, FP2020 recognizes that reaching young people with the services and supplies to meet their diverse needs, and that partnering them in meaningful ways is essential to meeting our goals. And the expertise of this community will be particularly vital as we look to answer very challenging questions. Something that's been resurfaced continually is how to translate this increased interest, both within the donor community but also within countries, and how do we translate that interest into evidence-based programs at scale. So FP 2020 is contributing to these efforts in three main areas, as you can see here. And we will be just continuing to discuss with the EAC how we can tap into these three areas and how we can work together to ensure that young people both have access to the data, that their voices are being heard at all levels, and that they're mainstreamed into advocacy in their own countries. And then also cultivating an acceptance of that evidence-based interventions, as mentioned on the third bullet here. Specifically for the EACs, that third bullet will be of interest. We are currently starting to field youth-specific technical assistance requests from FP 2020 commitment-making countries. And as we begin to formalize this request process, we'll certainly be in touch with the experts in this group, as well as the young people who are the instrumental part of this group. One thing I wanted to point out is that has already been raised in the Q&A session is around how FP 2020 is working between young people and focal points. And thankfully, we've used this focal point platform to our advantage over the last few months. Some examples are, as just a reminder, focal points are Ministry of Health, USAID, UNFPA, and sometimes DFID. And we've been using that platform with young people to realize opportunities, such as ensuring that young people are part of the process in reviewing adolescent strategies, opening up opportunities for young people to be a part of family planning technical working groups, as well as presenting their research to focal points and technical working groups within their countries. These are just a few of the examples of how both the focal point structure and our outreach to young people has been successful over the last few months. We'll be looking to strengthen these relationships between focal points and young people as we move forward. And to the Patrick, who I believe raised this question, I just want to make sure we're going to continue to work together on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you to all colleagues here for the portfolio update. So with that, we're going to turn to the Q&A portion. We've already received a number of questions, so we'll work through those first, but please do continue to submit your questions if you have them. You can do that through the Q&A pod, or you can press *6 to unmute your phone line. So with that, both Jen Pope and Susan Alteri asked if we could share the PowerPoint after the meeting, and we absolutely can. So that will be up and available for you, and we'll send you the link so that you can access that. Patrick, thanks for your question on the youth gap, and to Emily for responding to that as well. And then both Jay Gribble and Jose Mateo de la Cruz had questions about the EAC and membership and partnership and what that means and how we can effectively work together, since it's really unclear how we can use this platform. And Jay, just as a starting point, we agree with you that the idea was that this would be a much more sort of fluid and issue-driven kind of a relationship, and in some ways that's happening, particularly among youth colleagues and with the work that Sandra's been doing on with colleagues who are interested in moving forward on the rights agenda. So I think some of those issue-specific conversations are taking place, but there's still much more to do with you to make this actually effective across a range of issues. So we'd look to your suggestions about how we can consult with one another to make this more effective, because we agree it's a missed opportunity at the moment to fully use your capacities and to share information with you. And we're committed to figuring that out, but I think that's something we're going to need to do together. So I'd appreciate your thoughts if you all want to, again, share with us, is this a consultation we have specifically? Do we build out these meetings in a different way? Do we hold a meeting to talk through this and look at a range of issues? So getting your feedback about what would work for you would be very helpful. Jose, you asked specifically about sort of greater engagement at the country level, since you're based in the Philippines, and how you might more effectively work with the focal points there. And we agree there too that in working with focal points that are donors and governments, that we haven't effectively sort of pulled civil society into those conversations. The idea is that those focal points are members of the technical working groups at the country level already, and the mandate there is to share those conversations and that information with the broader stakeholder community. But we agree that it's more effectively done if civil society has a seat at the table to begin with. So we'll be adjusting our model in 2017 to open that up, but we're still going to be in the consultation phase in the next couple of months to build toward those agreements and to make sure that we have the funding in place to support that as well. But we agree that there's a goal there to do that. And so I would put to you that then engagement with your civil society partners as we push that forward at the country level would be the best pathway forward for that. Monica Kerrigan wrote in to remind everybody that today is World Vasectomy Day, and many of you here are champions. So to remember to use this day as a great opportunity for advocacy for male involvement, including in the most intimate way possible, for family planning. And so we encourage that. And then Monica is always the #1 champion of data use at the country level. So I'm going to turn that to Jason to respond to, and then Ron Fitzer also put in a couple of questions around the relationship between postpartum family planning and demand satisfied. So Jason will answer both those questions. Jason?
Thanks, Monica. A great point, something that I'm passionate about. We are working in multiple ways now, increasingly, to make sure that the data that are available and the structures, the focal points, the Track 20 M&E officers, technical working groups are not just annually, but now semi-annually looking at data and signals from their programs and looking at what's working or what we know about what's working. That's happening in multiple ways. I'll start sort of at the top. Obviously, my team and position is new, and it's been, I think, very helpful here in the Secretariat to have more access to just someone who can answer questions on data and how we are using data to drive our day-to-day activities at the Secretariat. The PME working group increasingly has, which has a work plan each year, has a whole section now that is on improving data use at a country level. And one of the things we'll be doing in the spring is taking our PME working group meeting to a focus country and learning how data, the FP2020 data, service statistics, and the Track 20 M&E officers are working to ensure that data are used at national and subnational levels. And then I will add that Track 20, who have traditionally done a yearly consensus workshop in commitment-making countries, are now expanding that to semi-annually doing these meetings and are working with the focal points with government and civil society to look at that data on a more frequent basis. A great example is in Senegal, where they're really diving deep into the rich data that they have there to look at actually why Senegal has seen a recent sort of slowdown in what had been really fantastic progress. And they're looking at some of the demand side issues in Senegal. So that just gives a snapshot, but I think we are increasingly working on this and will continue to do so. And we aim to have additional meetings, and it can be something that we do with the EAC to explore in more depth particular aspects of the data.
Thank you, Jason. The next question was, again, from Susan from World Vision, who asked about how we're going to be working more effectively with faith networks, that we reach out to the faith community as key partners in the family planning effort. This is not, if this isn't already an effort, and that she says from our work and that of other faith groups, religion plays a key role in helping people to understand why it is important to time pregnancy, space births, and limit births. Again, healthy timing and spacing can help people move toward use of modern methods of family planning, and we couldn't agree more, Susan. And you know, this time last year, I'll just back up a little bit. We're in the process of the annual rotation for reference group membership, and part of the conversation there as well is that we have 4 years left, and we want to build a group there that's going to be really cohesive as well as inclusive in order to maximize their potential for helping to drive the sector forward. So we're looking at rotation. This time last year, we sought to pull in a young person and really focus on young people in 2016, and that work is well underway. And at that point, we also said that we would look at then pulling in faith groups in 2017, and so that's a discussion now, and I'm hoping to share the outcomes of that in the coming weeks, but I can assure you that we will be looking to build those bridges and have a stronger, more inclusive process with faith networks in FP 2020 in 2017. And one of the ways that I hope we'll do that as well is in our work with the focal points and in the focal point workshops, and we'll have to work with the focal points to gauge their timing and availability, but there are a number of technical issues or areas where we think we can build out time to do some deeper dives with them on specific issues in the ways that we did with youth, which needs revisiting and a lot more intentionality there, but clearly the opportunities around working with men and boys and with faith networks are critical as well. So we're hoping that we'll bring the conversation not only to the reference group where it comes up organically, but with greater specificity, and then also through the focal point discussions. And then I wanted to also point you to the rapid response mechanism where we have been funding a number of faith-based initiatives and networks through that mechanism, recognizing the critical importance there as well. With that, Magwa had a question on, well, now I see you have two questions, Magwa. First is on discontinuation, saying we show discontinuation rates by reason, and asked if we could provide more information on the overall discontinuation rates for each method. So, Jason, back to you for that one.
Okay. I think in terms of, let me start with discontinuation. A good question on discontinuation. We are showing in the discontinuation slide, and Rati, could you back us up to the discontinuation slide? The PME working group has been, and FP 2020 have been exploring discontinuation now for 2 years. I will point out that we are in the current section of the progress report highlight a discontinuation report that was put out last year that looks at discontinuation across FP 2020 countries. It also looks at it over time. That's available on the website, a great resource, and it does show discontinuation by method for all reasons. The discontinuation rates, if you look at all reasons, are actually much higher than this, and importantly, what we are not showing here are the fertility-related reasons, meaning that that people stopped using because they wanted to have a pregnancy. And so when you add that in, and here what we do is we're aggregating across countries, the rates get much higher. And the PME working group is actually considering a discontinuation indicator, or indicator, which would be our 18th core indicator. And we are looking at how to report that by method, by reason. And I think it's important to distinguish between the reasons we've shown here, which suggests an actionable item in terms of why they discontinued, versus the fertility-related reasons, which when added to this really show incredibly high discontinuation. But I think obviously from a rights-based perspective, I think if people are wanting to get pregnant, then that's certainly a good reason to discontinue a method. So that is something that we are struggling with, about how to show this in a report, because the table becomes very large. And Magwa, I think, posed that question. We welcome your input on that.
Thank you, Jason. We have a second question from Magwa as well, saying that we see that DEMPA is the most commonly used method in FP 2020 countries. The recent review published by Chelsea Pullis suggests that there may be a stronger association between DMPA use and HIV acquisition. We're also hearing WHO is convening a meeting in 2 weeks' time to review the data and may make new recommendations. How prepared are we as a community to respond to a recommendation that could affect use of DMPA? Great questions, Magwa. I'm going to turn that over to Sandra.
Hi, Magwa. Thanks a lot for the question. I think we're as prepared as we can be, given we have to wait for the outcome from WHO. Certainly Chelsea has been at work on this for a very long time, as have many of the other researchers I know at USAID. And there have always been cautions included in the provision and training for providers around this, and as updates come available, this gets into the training curriculum, into the updates on the curriculum, and into the advisories around how this method should be used and utilized. And there has always been I think a great deal of openness and honesty around the impact it could have on HIV/AIDS. So I think we very anxiously await to hear what's coming out of the WHO meeting, and I know that given the severity of this issue and the importance of this issue, that the findings will be released very, very rapidly, and that Chelsea will be doing through Guttmacher everything they can to get the information out very, very rapidly, so that UNFPA, USAID, DFID, and all the other government and donor agencies can start really evaluating and coming up with the solutions. And this will probably be a bit of a long-term effort, just because these things are, but certainly it's one everyone is prepared for, and looking at how they can start adjusting programs, adjusting training, adjusting counseling, and those kinds of things.
Thanks very much, Sandra. On my apologies, I realized I introduced that you had a couple questions around the relationship between postpartum family planning and demand satisfied, but we didn't actually answer them, so Jason's going to do that now. Jason?
Okay, thanks, Anne, for the questions, and I'll just I'll read them, or a short version of them, so that everyone can hear. And the question from Anne was, in the unmet need part of the demand satisfied indicator, is it right that the usual DHS definition is used? The answer to that is yes, that that in getting to demand satisfied, we are essentially combining the traditional DHS definitions of unmet need and of modern contraceptive prevalence rate. So that is how demand satisfied is created. The second part of the question was whether women who are within 2 years postpartum are not considered to have a need for family planning, and that if so, that would underestimate unmet need. I encourage you all to familiarize yourself with changes that have been made to unmet need definitions over time, and an important paper to look at is available through the Demographic Health Survey website, and that is from, it's a DHS analytical study on revising unmet need for family planning, and it's from January 2012. And in that, they look at changes that have occurred over time. And it is true that in the past, this was a problem with unmet need definition. The current unmet need definition does ask all women who are within 3 years of a pregnancy, asks them whether they are postpartum amenorrheic, and if they are not, if their period has returned, then they are at risk of a pregnancy, and they do contribute to unmet need if they do not desire a pregnancy within the next 2 years and are not using a modern method. So that has been altered and is accounted for in both the unmet need definition, and therefore the will be accounted for in the demand satisfied. We will over time have additional webinars specifically on the demand satisfied indicator, probably focusing on that in particular with our colleagues from Track 20, and I encourage you all to join those in the future, and we can explore this together. There was one last question, and that was on a particular question on LAM in DRC and whether it was asked in the last DHS survey. Quickly looking, and agree that it was not asked. You do note in our progress report that traditional methods are showing up as the most common method in DRC, according to the last DHS have to look in particular at why LAM was not included and something that we can do so. So thanks for noting that important point.
Thanks, Jason. Keep the mic because there's another question for you here from Jose Mateo de la Cruz, who's asking if there's age disaggregated data of contraceptive use and discontinuation.
Great question. We have in the latter tables of the of both the print and digital versions of the progress report, we do report age disaggregated MCPR data, so that is available. I will caution you that the numbers for the disaggregations, which are available in 5-year categories and also available by urban, rural, and by wealth quintile, they're a great aggregation of data that are also available from all of the surveys. We do these disaggregations from the last survey, as opposed to our data in the for indicator 2 MCPR, which is a modeled estimate. We are not able yet to model estimates through a by age group and or by urban and rural. So some of that has to do with the availability of the data and getting all that inputted. Some of it has to do with sample size, and as you get smaller and smaller samples, it becomes difficult to model that progress. So the disaggregations in the back of the book are from last survey, and they will be different from what you see from the modeled estimates, which are a current year estimate of all women MCPR. Hope that's clear. And then discontinuation is not available currently through DHS, which is really the only survey which does the contraceptive calendar or the reproductive health calendar and allows us to calculate discontinuation rates. So currently not available, and probably not likely to be available unless you're doing specific analysis. Could be done on the data sets by analysts, but not available through us right now.
Thanks, Jason. I just want to let you know that Anne also responded that LAM is a modern method and not a traditional method. And there's a paper on WHO.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And I think, Anne, what I'm suggesting is that it's possible that due to the exclusion of the LAM category in the survey, and I can't say this for sure, but where are those LAM users falling is a question. They are not. They're certainly not showing up in the other modern method category where we would expect them to be if LAM wasn't listed as a particular category. And so, one has to sort of conjecture that maybe they're falling into the traditional category. They're just placing themselves there or being placed there by those who are filling out the survey with them. So absolutely agree, and we treat LAM as a modern method in all of our work.
Thank you, Jason. So I think we have what will be our final question from Susan Rich, and I encourage all of you, if you have additional questions, please do write to us and we'll continue the dialogue, and again, can set up any issue-specific conversations you wish to have. We're here to do that, so we look forward to working with you further. The last question excuse me, came in from Susan Rich, Sarah Rich, who says it looks like several of the countries on the left side of the S curve are countries that face recurring humanitarian crises. How can the humanitarian community support FP 2020 efforts in those countries? I think it's a great question, Sarah, and you and I have talked about this a bit. And it's not just the countries that have made commitments, but also of the total 69, those who are not in a position to make an FP 2020 commitment because they are in ongoing humanitarian crises or difficult situations, and I think we know who those countries are, and I think we have an ethical and a moral obligation to continue to reach out to those countries as we talk about focusing on 69, and as I mentioned, Sarah and I had a chance to sit down and talk about ways that we might do this going forward, including deeper engagement with the IWAG, the International Interagency Working Group, that focuses on reproductive health in crisis settings. And we are committed to doing that with you, Sarah, and with those partners. I think we have a couple of other opportunities as well, including through the Every Woman, Every Child, Everywhere work stream, which is also helping to bring these two communities together so that we're not working in isolation of one another, but can rather share lessons learned to strengthen the SRHR and family planning programs and processes in humanitarian settings. So we're participating in those conversations as well. We shared the LARC consensus statement with them last year and pushed for LARCs as a key intervention for women, especially in displacement, but in longer-term humanitarian situations. And we'll continue to explore the possibilities there. And I want to end on a note here of flagging UNFPA. People may not be aware that U.S. government has also been supporting UNFPA's work for reproductive health and humanitarian settings in recent years, including I think there was almost $50 million in the last year. Well, between the last two, it was closer to $80 million just for humanitarian work. So as you advocate for support for UNFPA, remember that a key piece of U.S. investment also goes for reproductive health and humanitarian settings through UNFPA's work. And if there's an effort there to defund, that those women are also going to be made more vulnerable as well. So as you're thinking about UNFPA and U.S. government support for that, think about that piece of it too, as we will be. And so I think it's more important than ever before that we continue to build these bridges between development and humanitarian processes. So with that, we want to continue to thank you for your partnership, and particularly on ways that we can make this mechanism more effective and invite you in more effectively to our processes as well, so that we can tap into your creativity, your knowledge, your passion, and really support countries to achieve their goals. Thank you for spending so much time with us here this morning. Thank you for your feedback, and we look forward to working with all of you going forward. Bye-bye.